Thieves Market, a small game by TMG, a game in which the players take on the role of thieves that will be fighting over some loot. Several times in the game they will have to split loot following a very interesting procedure, and then they spend their portion of the loot to hire henchmen and to buy other forms of things that will gain them notoriety, infamy. Of course, that at the end will be used to score points. Now, how does the game work? Well, we have many cards, as you see from there, but before we look at the cards, we need to look at the dice that represent the loot that the players will be fighting over. At the beginning of each turn, you roll all of these dice. If you have less than 5 players, not all of them, but you roll these dice here. These dice show gems of various colors and bags of gold, and this looks like a mask to me, but we are assured in the rulebook that this is purple laurel. In any case, it represents infamy. So we have 4 type of gems: bag of gold and infamy. Also, there is another game piece which is used as a real game piece, not just as a marker, and that is the first player token. Look at this, by the way. I mean, this is just so adorable. At the beginning of each turn, the dice are rolled and the first player's marker is placed in the middle of the table as a piece that can be grabbed. Then, starting with the first player, the players will grab a portion of the loot. Now, it is your turn to grab a portion of the loot. In this first part of a turn, you will choose a number of dice and or potentially this guy here. Suppose this turn I wanna get these dice here, and I put them by my play area. Next player can choose to get any number of objects from the center of the table, even all of them, or can choose to steal my portion of the loot. That is, you can choose, I suppose the second player does that, taking stuff from the middle of the table. Now the third player could take any and all of those dice there, or could steal one of these 2 portions of the loot. When you steal something from an opponent, you steal all of it, but you have to return at least an object to the center of the table, and that may be the first player's token, or it may be a die. Very important, if you do place a die in the middle of the table after you're stealing the whole thing from another player, you need to re-roll it. And you continue like this until all players have acquired something. And at that point, the players will use the loot that they have acquired to purchase cards. Starting with the player that grabbed the first player's token, players will purchase cards from these 3 decks. At the beginning, you get cards from deck A, and after the cards have been taken from that row of 5 cards, the row 5 is replenished, and when you do not have enough cards here to replenish it, you also start drawing from this deck here. You draw 5 cards and you form another line, which also means that some of the previous cards may still be there. When you do not have enough cards in here to replenish this deck, then this deck here is used. And when you do not have enough cards to replenish the row of available cards from deck C, the game is over and you count points. Another important thing about these decks of cards is that you do not use the whole deck in every game. Actually, there is quite a chunk of each deck which is removed, which is super good, because really that adds a lot of variety and unpredictability. You cannot fall in love with strategies that you think will always work, because the cards that allow you to perform the strategy may simply not be there. As for the cards themselves, they have some humorous illustrations. We are in a world of thieves, but it's fantasy thieves, so there are also like weird characters, golems, plus tongue-in-cheek illustrations. Cards have a cost, which is indicated here on the side, which must be produced by using icons on the dice, by using game effects, and also you can spend gold. You can spend gold as a wild symbol to purchase cards. Gold is generated by these symbols here, but you only convert one of these symbols into a unit of gold at the end of the turn, so you cannot spend the gold that you roll the very turn, the same turn in which you roll it. You store it for later. Also, these symbols are used to collect infamy, which is worth points at the end of the game. But in many cases, you will want to use your symbols to buy these cards that go in your play area. The icons tell you what the cards do, and yes, there are a lot of icons, and yes, there are a lot of effects. To give a sense, this card allows you to change a blue result into one of these other ones. So this does the same with red. This one allows you to discard to use a blue stone to gain an infamy. Usually you can only purchase a card per turn in this fashion, but if you have this card, for example, and you have a white die in your pool of loot dice, then you can buy an extra card, and here's the same with the white one. Really large range of effects, a little dizzying at the beginning. You convert a white result in a bag of gold, 2 victory points, that's simple. So quite a dizzying number of icons and effects to remember, and expect to spend quite a bit of time in your first game or two with your nose buried in this player aid, which is the back of the instruction sheet, really, which is very good. It really tells you extensively all that these effects do. And you also have a general conversion here that tells you what the symbols stand for. So you kind of like use them to form your visual equations. So after a while it becomes intuitive, it becomes pretty easy. But again, there is a little bit of a learning curve there. But if you played Roll for the Galaxy or Race to the Galaxy, then, I mean, you're good. You are experienced. You are familiar with the large pools of icons that need to be understood and learned to play the game. So you buy these cards, and what happens really is that the cards from deck A will give you some resources and will give you capabilities of purchasing more cards, like multiple cards, or to get more resources. Basically, here you're building an engine of resources, so you can then buy more advanced cards from this deck here. As you can see, the cost increases, and again, you're looking for ways to get extra stuff, get extra infamy, victory points. The cards also have an icon here, as you can see, and that only has to do with effects. If the effects that refer to that icon, then it matters. Here, for example, if you have a single card with that icon, at the end of the game you score 2 points. If you had 2, you score 4. Many different effects. So basically here you have in the B section extra ways of, I would say, increasing your purchase power, getting more stuff, being able to buy more and more expensive stuff, and also starting to build sets of icons, of symbols, of card effects that will score extra points at the end of the game. But then when you get to the section C is when you have the cards that allow you to score a lot of points. That's really what deck C is about. After all, there isn't anything after this, so when are you gonna score points? When are you gonna get cards that allow you to score a lot of points? If not, then when you're using deck C. For example, here for any 2 infamy that you have, you get to score victory points. Look at the card. Subtle, social, political, satire. Here you score infamy based on the number of items that you had at the end of the splitting the loot phase. Here you get points based on the other cards that you have. Here, if you're the only player that has a card with this symbol here, you score 7. If somebody else does, you score 5. So, or again, you don't want to be tied with all those game effects. Got this one is like 4 straight points, 6 straight points. You can't go wrong with those. So this is in essence the game, as simple as that. Splitting the loot in that original fashion that allows you to either grab as many as you want from the center or grab everything minus 1 item from somebody else. Continue like this until everybody has something in front of them. Spend the loot, activate the effects from the cards that you already have, to buy more stuff, to acquire as many resources as possible. Continue like this until the end of the game, when deck C cannot be refilled, and then you count victory points. At the end of the game, there are extra points to be scored by the player that has the most henchmen. Henchman is one of the icons on the cards. Also, the player with the most gold scores 3 extra points. And then you put together points that come from resources that you have accumulated before and game effects like the ones that I showed you from deck C, and you determine the winner. Sometimes a game needs just one good idea to give the game a distinctive personality. Of course, that also needs to go together with a lot of other stuff and good playtesting, and everything needs to work well. But here we have a game that has both things. Has one innovative idea that really makes the game feel different from other games, and that idea is framed by a very solid core of rules, of mechanics and ideas. The splitting of the loot, that is something that I hadn't seen before, and as I read the rules, I could not really figure it out. I did not understand why people would not simply keep stealing from each other forever. And of course, one of those things, as soon as you play it, you see it, which is really why games are experiences and not just the sum of rules plus actions. It's more than the sum of the parts. And as soon as you start playing, you realize what the thing is. First, you are trying to make packets of things for yourself that maybe are not too attractive to other people. You see their cards, so you see the kind of cards the kind of dice, the kind of icons that they are likely to want. And so you're trying to get stuff that is useful for you and maybe will not attract them. But of course, there is also a fine line there, because it's an extra bonus if you can also grab a die that they would use, but you leave just enough that they may be tempted to go with what's left on the table rather than grab your stuff. Because people are not going to steal from each other forever, because every time that you do so, you lose one of the items that you stole. So actually, if I can grab a combination of things that is just nice for me, just a nice combo that would allow me, for example, to buy a card that requires a lot of resources on the board, and it's just that, maybe you're not interested in taking that from me, because once you take it, you lose one of those dice, so actually you do not have the combo anymore. You have a combination of dice and maybe it's not nearly that interesting. If nothing else, numerically, I have 3 dice, there are 3 left in the middle of the table. If you steal mine, there has to be a reason, because otherwise you are, after all, getting 2 only, and you're leaving 4 on the table after you return one of those that you stole from me. So it's not gonna go on forever, because there's gonna be a time, if people steal from each other, where somebody who still hasn't gotten anything, looks in the center of the table and sees a pretty decent loot and says, you know what? I think I can deal with some gold here, I'll get a point of infamy, I'll use some other resources, I can deal with that. So that phase doesn't drag on, but actually it's pretty exciting, it's pretty interesting, because it is about reading the opponents. It is about, well, I don't know if here is pushing your luck is the idea. It's pushing your friends, pushing your understanding of your friends. I think that I know more or less what is that will be enough for me, as much as I can get without triggering your reaction, and I'm gonna try that as I push your knowledge of your friends' reactions. So it's a fun aspect, it's a fun element that I hadn't seen before. It goes then also well together with the purchase phase. And at the beginning, I was afraid the game was going to be a little slow, but when you learn the game, it is going to be slow. Take the first game just as a training game, because those icons are going to be confusing. There is that entry test that you have to take. You have to learn about those icons. It's not super fun, but it's part of a process. And there's another game by TMG that has a similar steep learning curve, Guilds of London, which I also like very much. But again, you have to learn those icons. But once you learn those icons, the game doesn't really move too slowly, because people will start acquiring abilities that give them cards. And when you're grabbing your dice, if you're grabbing certain dice and leaving certain other ones, it is because you have a fairly good idea what you want to do. So it's not likely that after people went through this process of redistributing the dice, You're gonna have analysis paralysis. You're gonna have people that spend a long time thinking how to spend those 3 dice that really can be spent in only 1 or 2 ways, and maybe if they use a wild resource, so they can be spent in an extra way. But then also there may be ways that they started building up and setting up their combos that will make certain things preferable rather than others. So I have a card that will score if it goes together with other cards, so that all the things being equal becomes preferable. That is to say that even the purchase phase has some interesting decisions that you make there, but they're not overwhelming. They don't get to the point that will make the game they will give this game paralysis. And it's just enough to be that soft spot, entertaining enough, exciting enough, enough decisions without, again, crashing players with a complexity that may generate analysis paralysis. I also like how the game seems to pick up speeds, so it's not just the same thing over and over again, round after round, because after a couple of rounds, you start building an engine of game effects, you start buying several cards each turn, so the game moves faster and faster. Another worry that I had was that after a while you will start having so many cards on your tableau that you will forget some of the effects, but it's very easy to organize them by type. I have several cards with the same effect, to say, to let me buy an extra card or let me turn a resource into gold. Then all those same effects I put together, and I know this is the pile that lets me turn stuff into gold, and I have a green and a red in there, so I know that a green or a red I can turn into gold. This is the stuff that gives me the extra buy, and I have this and that resource that trigger that effect. So by organizing them in little columns based on the effect, was actually very manageable. Looking at all the icons, taking advantage of those, again, without slowing down the game, was not a problem at all. So I only had good things to say about this game. I really was really nice surprise. It didn't feel too long, it didn't last too long, it had this nice change of pace as the game continues. People use more effects, and at the end is they grab the high scoring cards at the end. So it has a nice narrative, not in the sense of like a dungeon crawler, that type of narrative, but I just say there is an organic development of the mechanics that makes the game more interesting. It really makes the game build up towards an apotheosis, towards an acme of interest as the good stuff comes out in Deck C, and you need to be ready. Fun game. It has that very fresh regional mechanic that will incur some really nice interactions. You'll get to know your friends better than you thought you did. And if you don't, of course, you're gonna lose the game, because they're gonna manipulate your dice and leave you with the stinkers without leaving you resources that let you much to do. But fun game. It has an innovative and fresh mechanic, but again, it's not like a flower in the desert. It's an innovative, fresh, and fun mechanics that is part of a game engine that, to me, is pretty solid, is pretty well oiled, and works very well. Fun game, Thieves Market by TMG. Give it a try. It feels different from many other games, and what's most important, it's pretty darn fun.